I thought secrets died with my husband, but the attic still breathed. The house felt both too large and too intimate, every corner holding echoes of laughter now dulled by loss. My name is Eleanor. I am 64, a widow, and the mother of one daughter who used to call this place home. After the funeral, I returned not for closure, but for order, to catalog what remained of a life built in half-century rhythms of trust and routine. The air upstairs carried the faint scent of cedar and old books, a perfume of safety. I traced my fingers along the banister he had polished for years, remembering the sound of his hum beneath each stroke. In that quiet, warmth filled the attic like sunlight through cloth, a flicker of peace before the world below could intrude. I opened a chest lined with photographs, letters, and holiday ribbons. Their edges trembled, whispering small memories of kindness and chaos. For a moment, I thought grief could be organized, packed neatly into boxes labeled "Keep." Then I saw the beam, split slightly, irregular. Behind it, metal gleamed dull and secretive. A safe, hidden higher than eye level, tucked as if meant never to be found. I steadied the ladder and climbed, my pulse matching each creak of the wood. When I turned the old dial, it resisted, protesting years of silence before clicking open like a confession. Inside lay a stack of folded papers bound with a faded blue ribbon. The scent shifted, cedar giving way to ink and something faintly sour, as if betrayal had a smell. Each page bore my daughter's signature. The handwriting was precise, almost proud. She had signed deeds, authorizations, and transfers I never approved. My husband's name appeared too, copied carefully, his signature reproduced, but missing the small slant only I would notice. My breath shortened, the dust turned heavy. I carried the papers to the small window. The late afternoon light revealed watermark seals and dates that matched the months he was bedridden. My hand shook. She had done this while I was nursing him, while I was learning how to live on half a salary and half a heart. The photograph of us, her 8th birthday frosting on her nose, slipped from one of the envelopes. The smile in that photo no longer felt innocent. It looked rehearsed, almost complicit. I sat on the floorboards, the cedar scent still clinging to the air. Why would she do this? The question left my mouth like smoke, dissolving before it reached the rafters. I thought of the nights she said she was helping with his accounts, of the afternoons she refused my calls, all the small hesitations now lined up neatly beside her forged signature, proof disguised as love. For a moment, the house seemed to tilt, every familiar sound altered. The ticking clock below sounded slower, heavier. The warmth drained from the air, replaced by the sterile chill of realization. I folded the papers back into the safe, but left it unlatched. I wasn't ready to hide the truth again. Not this time. I pressed my palm against the photograph before placing it on the beam, his smile, her eyes, my silence between them. I whispered a vow I'd never spoken aloud. I will uncover what you've done, and I will face it, even if it ruins what's left of us. The attic's stillness swallowed the words. Somewhere below, a door creaked open, then shut softly, as if the house itself acknowledged the shift. Her name was on every stolen page. She hugged me too tightly that morning, almost rehearsed. The kitchen was warm with light spilling through the blinds, dust floating in narrow beams above the breakfast table. It was the same table where birthdays had been sung and apologies whispered. Yet that morning, every sound felt brittle. The kettle's whistle lingered longer than it should have. The clink of china echoed sharp and deliberate, as if the room itself had learned to eavesdrop. She poured my tea, her hand steady but her eyes avoiding mine. "I closed that old account, Mom," she said, voice smooth as honey poured over stone. "You don't need to worry." I smiled, though something inside me shifted. "Closed?" I asked quietly. "Without transferring the balance?" Her spoon struck the rim of the cup. "I handled it," she said. The word "handled" scraped against my chest like metal. The sound of that spoon, a single bright ring, followed me even after she left for work. It became the hum of something deeper, the echo of deceit that once disguised my husband's business trips and late meetings. I had forgiven him because I thought lies died with men. I was wrong. The house returned to silence, but not peace. I rinsed her cup, my fingers tracing the rim, noticing a chip I hadn't seen before, a small imperfection, barely visible, yet it caught the light like a scar. I opened the drawer beside the stove and pulled out the ledger I'd kept since he passed. Each expense was written in neat blue ink: groceries, utilities, repairs. I ran my finger down the columns, pausing where her handwriting appeared. There, in her perfect cursive, were entries marked loan payment and transfer fee. The numbers, $480 and $1,260, stood like accusations. Two figures that didn't belong in a widow's ledger. The faucet dripped. The sound matched the slow, metronomic pace of dread. When she came home that evening, I didn't speak right away. I watched her place her keys on the counter, an easy habit, but something about it made me pause. They jingled louder than usual, metallic, purposeful. She looked up, smiling too brightly. "You've been in the attic again, haven't you?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I found things your father meant to keep safe." Her expression flickered. Only a second, but it was there. "You always read too much into everything." The next words rose before I could stop them. "Then tell me why. Your signature is on papers that aren't yours." Her breath hitched. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then help me understand." For a moment, she stood still. The air between us thickened with the scent of burnt toast from the morning, still faint in the air, a ghost of normalcy. She picked up her cup, turned it once, and said softly, "I did what was necessary. You'll see." She walked out before I could answer. The hum of her car starting in the driveway felt like the end of something unnamed. I stayed at the table, tracing the chip on the teacup again, that small imperfection like a warning I'd ignored too long. The ledger lay open beside it, ink glinting under the low kitchen light. I wrote one line beneath the last entry: "Truth, pending balance." The clock struck 8. The silence afterward wasn't peace, it was suspension, the pause before a truth decides to surface. Outside, wind moved through the maple tree, tapping softly against the window pane. It sounded like someone knocking, but too faint to answer. I looked at the keys still on the counter, the ones she always left behind. They weren't just metal, they were access, entry to what I hadn't yet seen. The sound of her keys meant something new. The first number didn't lie. The rest only deepened it. I sat across from the bank manager, the faint hum of the air conditioner marking each second of discomfort. He was polite, cautious, the kind of man who'd practiced bad news until it sounded like procedure. He slid the stack of papers toward me, his voice low. "These are the records you requested, ma'am. Every transaction is authorized under your family's estate code." The pages were smooth at first, then coarse near the edges where the ink had bled through. Each line carried a date, a signature, and a sum that shouldn't exist. $12,480 gone. Withdrawn over 6 months, each marked with her initials. "She must have used a transfer form," I murmured. He hesitated, fingers tapping once. "Yes. Reference ID 41A7, standard authorization. The signature matches yours, but—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. I touched the top sheet, the texture almost abrasive, as if the paper itself rejected what it carried. The scent of toner and old carpet filled the space, faint, but enough to bring nausea. I remembered her words, "I handled it," and understood what that had meant. Outside, sunlight flared against the glass, making the world look distant and sterile. I counted each figure again, whispering them under my breath, as though repetition could summon reason. $2,300, $1,760, $4,890. Numbers stacked like stones over a grave. He offered water. I declined. Instead, I asked, "When were these last reviewed?" 3 months ago, he said, "after your husband's estate finalized." 3 months, around the time she'd stopped answering my evening calls. I folded the statement, the corners sharp against my thumb. "Can you print me certified copies?" "Of course." The printer clicked and whirred, mechanical, unfeeling. That sound, steady and exact, made me realize how little emotion the world grants to the truth. I signed the acknowledgement form, my hand steady. Proof doesn't tremble. People do. As I left the bank, I glanced at the clock above the teller windows. Its second hand moved with a precision I envied. It was 3:15 p.m., the hour she used to call her father every afternoon. Habit turned into betrayal on the same timeline. The walk to the car felt longer than it should have. The afternoon heat pressed down like judgment. I unlocked the door, laid the documents on the passenger seat, and stared at the logo embossed at the top, an emblem of trust now rendered meaningless. I turned the ignition but didn't drive. Instead, I opened the envelope again. The texture of the paper against my fingers felt like sandpaper, each fiber reminding me of friction I had ignored for years. I traced her initials, LM, repeated in perfect imitation of care. "She planned it," I whispered, step by step. For years, I'd measured love in gestures, a call, a visit, a shared cup of tea. Now love had numbers, withdrawals, signatures. She had converted affection into accounting. I parked outside the old bakery we used to visit after her school concerts. The smell of sugar drifted faintly through the air. Memory fought with reason, both losing ground. I wanted to walk in, order 2 eclairs like before, pretend none of this existed. But pretending is what allowed the ledger to stain in the first place. When I finally opened my notebook, I wrote just one line beneath the day's date. "The truth is numerical. The wound is measurable." The stakes had shifted. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about identity. The woman who shared my blood had stolen more than dollars. She'd rewritten the arithmetic of trust. As I closed the notebook, I realized the cruelest part. The balance sheet was honest. It showed what had been taken, what was left, and what could never be replaced. The total balanced only when love was removed. His signature was supposed to protect her, not damn her. The law office smelled faintly of ink and dust, a scent that clung to the years of promises written and broken inside those walls. The blinds were half closed, slicing sunlight into narrow bars across the desk. I sat opposite Martin, the man who'd once toasted my husband at every anniversary, the man who swore he'd look after the girls. He cleared his throat before speaking. "She said it was for tuition," he began. His voice carried the careful rhythm of guilt, soft enough to sound professional, too even to be innocent. "For tuition?" I repeated. When her degree was already finished, he shifted in his chair. The pen in his hand clicked twice. "She said it was a technical course, short term. I didn't question it. I just signed." The paper lay between us, a notarized agreement, formal and clean. But in the sunlight, one thing stood out. My husband's name, copied neatly beneath Martin's. Except it wasn't his writing. His true signature always had a flourish on the L. This one didn't. My throat tightened. "You co-signed a loan in his name?" He hesitated. "She brought the form already signed. I assumed he'd agreed before he passed." I closed my eyes. The light behind my eyelids burned red. "She told you that?" He nodded. "She was very convincing. Said she needed to finalize the amount before the estate froze." "How much?" I asked. He opened a folder, flipping through sheets with shaking fingers. $28,000. It cleared the same week the inheritance processed. The number struck like a blade. She had drained what her father left to honor, used it to erase debts he never knew existed. I leaned forward, fingers brushing the edge of the page. The texture of the document was crisp, freshly printed. "Do you know where the money went?" He swallowed hard. "Credit consolidation. 3 accounts, all under her name." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock, each second drawing the truth closer. I rose slowly, steadying my voice. "You're not the villain here, Martin. You're just the witness." He frowned, guilt crawling across his face. "I should have called you." "Yes," I said. "You should have." The light through the blinds had shifted, cutting diagonally across the page now. The ink shimmered faintly. I thought of the safe in the attic, the papers, the forged marks, the weight of betrayal. This document was their descendant, part of the same bloodline of deceit. "She used my husband's name to pay for her silence," I said quietly. He looked up. "Silence about what?" "The kind that keeps a family's face clean while it rots underneath." He set the pen down, its silver body rolling slightly before stopping against the envelope. "Do you want a copy of the file?" "Yes," I said. "Every page." He handed me the envelope. The paper inside was heavier than it looked. I slipped it into my bag, its corner pressing against my side like a wound that refused to close. As I turned to leave, he spoke again, voice almost a whisper. "She told me you'd never find out." I paused in the doorway, the sunlight now spilling across the floor, like truth untamed. "She was wrong," I said. Outside, the light was blinding. The air smelled of metal and exhaust, sharper than the musty stillness inside. I walked toward the parking lot, envelope under my arm, pen marks still burning in my mind. The stakes had changed again. What began as numbers now had names, and one of them was mine. He whispered, "She said you'd never find out." Every envelope carried her handwriting, yet none her heart. The trunk was heavier than I remembered, its hinges groaning like something tired of keeping secrets. Inside, a stack of letters rested in perfect order, bound by a ribbon the color of smoke. Candle wax sealed the oldest ones. Thick, uneven drops hardened into tiny monuments of pretense. I broke the first seal carefully, afraid the truth might crumble if I handled it too roughly. Her handwriting had always been lovely, measured, rounded, patient, the kind that made people trust the words before reading them. The scent of candle wax still clung faintly to the pages, mingled with something bitter, like regret disguised as perfume. The letter began with concern. "She's unwell," it read. "The grief hasn't passed. She imagines conversations that never happened." The handwriting was hers, but the voice, it wasn't my daughter's. It was composed for an audience, meant for sympathy, not truth. I read another, dated 6 months later. "She forgets where she places things. Her mind wanders." Each line was careful, rehearsed, and each carried a postmark from a different city office. She hadn't been writing to comfort anyone. She had been documenting me, one sealed accusation at a time. I found one with a faint smudge of ink near the bottom. "Please keep this confidential," it said. "We don't want her making another scene." Scene. That word made my stomach twist. I remembered that winter, the one where I stopped answering calls because every word from her came edged with concern that didn't belong to her. She'd rewritten my exhaustion as instability, my silence as evidence. I lit a candle on the nearby shelf. Its small flame wavered, throwing our memories against the attic walls like shadows refusing to fade. "Why?" I whispered to no one. The letters gave no reply, only dates, signatures, and postal seals. In one envelope, I found my doctor's name. She had written to him, too. "She's forgetful," she'd said. "She may misplace medication." That was the month he switched my prescription without explanation. I'd blamed him, but it wasn't him. It was her. The realization arrived not with shock, but with cold precision. She hadn't lied outright. She had reshaped the truth, bending it until compassion turned into control. I stacked the letters beside me, counting quietly. 21 in total, 21 polished distortions. When I reached the last one, my breath caught. It was addressed to the family estate board, dated the same week my husband died. "As her daughter," she'd written, "I'm assuming responsibility for the property until my mother regains full capacity." Capacity. That single word stripped me of dignity on official paper. She'd orchestrated every move, starting with sympathy, ending in power. I pressed my thumb against the wax of the final seal, the old scent rising once more, sweet, faint, Treacherous. My hands trembled, not from age, but from recognition. This wasn't madness. This was method. I imagined her sitting by candlelight, rewriting me one sentence at a time. Each letter had been her performance, each seal a curtain drop on my credibility. I closed my eyes, letting the candle flicker near the trunk. The flame bowed low for a moment, like it understood. The stakes were no longer financial. They were moral. Every letter was proof that love, when turned cold, can become administration. I gathered them in a neat pile, aligning the edges, because even now I needed order. My reflection in the window caught the candle's faint halo. "You built my silence," I said softly, "but I'll speak louder than ink." I slipped the bundle into a folder marked with the day's date, today's truth replacing her years of fiction. As I sealed the folder, the last envelope rolled free and fell onto the floor. Its postmark glinted under the candlelight. Official, unambiguous, final. It bore the insignia of the state. Her lies had government stamps. I thought records were sterile, until one bled. The City Hall lobby smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, a sterile combination that pretended to erase the lives it processed. My breath fogged in the air conditioning. A line of tired faces waited under fluorescent lights that flickered like weary eyes. I clutched the folder against my chest, thin, yet heavier than it should have been. Inside it lay the amendment form that could redraw my life in ink. When the clerk called my number, the sound echoed through the marble hall. "Next, window 4. I approached, my heels clicking like seconds counted down to truth. The woman behind the glass adjusted her glasses, scanning my form. "Correction to property record?" "Yes." "Original owner deceased?" "Yes, my husband." Her expression softened briefly, then returned to bureaucratic neutrality. "And this? Transfer. Who filed it?" "My daughter." Her eyes flicked up, assessing the quiet tremor beneath my calm. "You're contesting the entry?" "I'm correcting it." She turned to her screen, fingers moving with clinical precision. "I'll need supporting proof, certified death certificate, estate release, and original authorization." I slid the folder through the slot. Inside were copies of every document she'd once used to steal. The clerk unfolded them carefully, her nails tapping faintly against the paper. The air between us grew colder, as if the vents had turned spiteful. She frowned. "The signatures, they don't match." "I know. Do you have an affidavit?" I pulled a single sheet from the folder, my statement notarized and dated last week. "Reference entry 71B5. That's the forgery." Her eyes widened slightly before she caught herself. "This will have to go upstairs for review. It's an institutional override." "I understand." I could see the faint rise of her breath as she read the name again, the same one carved on the headstone, the same one my daughter had borrowed for theft. The clerk reached for the stamp, but paused, looking at me over the counter. "You're certain you want this recorded? Once it's sealed, it's permanent." "I'm certain," I said. "I won't let ghosts hold my house hostage." She pressed the stamp down hard. The sound cracked through the silence, one clean, deliberate hit. The red seal bled faintly at the edges of the paper. That was the moment something shifted. For years I'd begged, reasoned, pleaded. But now ink had become my boundary. Access limited. Power shifted. She slid the amended copy back to me. "This will notify all linked departments within 72 hours. You'll receive a verification reference ID." "Thank you," I said, though gratitude wasn't what I felt. It was relief, cold, sharp, earned. As I turned to leave, a voice stopped me. "Ma'am, one more thing." I turned. Someone already called earlier this morning asking if this file could be delayed. I paused. "Who?" She checked her notes. "Didn't give a name. Just said it was family." Of course she did. I forced a smile. "If they call again, tell them the seal's already dry." Outside, the wind hit colder than expected. The temperature drop stung my cheeks as if the air itself were warning me. She knew what I had done. The courthouse clock struck noon. its echo deep and final. I looked down at the stamped page, the red circle spreading slightly where ink met damp air. This was more than an amendment. It was a declaration. She had crossed every moral line, and I had just drawn one she couldn't. My phone buzzed before I reached the steps. An unknown number. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The boundary was already written, signed, and sealed under government light. As I walked toward the exit, the folder warmed slightly in my hands, heat seeping through the cold paper like breath returning to a body long frozen. The stamp echoed louder than her threats. Truth makes small towns crueler than lies ever did. The morning the bulletin came out, I heard the paper land on my porch before I saw it. That soft thud carried a kind of violence, quiet but final. By the time I opened the door, a neighbor across the street was already pretending not to look. Her curtains swayed, but not from wind. The headline didn't name me, yet it didn't need to. "A mother at odds with her own blood," it read. The article dripped with words like unstable, bitter, possessive. My daughter's name was missing, but her fingerprints were everywhere. In the phrasing, the pity she'd purchased, the tone that painted her as the victim of my sanity. The air was still, except for the sound of sprinklers hissing in the next yard. I tore the paper in half and let the pieces fall to the ground. The sound it made, a faint rustle, was softer than my breath, but it stayed louder in my mind than the gossip that followed. At the market, eyes turned without moving. Carts shifted aside with polite distance. Mrs. Avery from the bakery smiled too wide. "We've been worried about you," she said, voice sticky with sweetness. "I'm fine," I replied. She leaned closer. "You know, sometimes children act out of love." "Love doesn't forge signatures," I said quietly. Her smile faltered. "People talk, dear. Best not to make it worse." I walked away, the hum of her whisper trailing behind me like smoke. Later that afternoon, I heard two men talking outside the hardware store. One said, "She's suing her own family." The other answered, "That's what grief does, makes you mean." I wanted to tell them grief doesn't make people mean. It reveals who already was. Inside the store, I caught my reflection in the window. Older, sharper, but standing. Behind me, shelves glowed under pale light. Outside, a pair of teenagers read from a folded paper, laughing at a paragraph that used the word delusional. I pressed my hand to the glass. It was cold, grounding. "You can call me mad," I murmured, "but madness still sees truth." That night, I sat near the same window, curtains open, lights off. The hum of gossip seeped through the walls again, low, rhythmic, familiar. It reminded me of how they once spoke kindly, back when my husband was alive and our family was the picture of decency. The same mouths that blessed our holidays now chewed my reputation for supper. But I stayed still, watching the glow from their homes flicker across my lawn. I wanted them to see me sitting there, unhidden, unashamed. When the wind rose, it carried a page from the torn bulletin across the porch. I caught it before it blew away. The print smudged under my thumb, a patch of ink blurring over one sentence. "Some inherit money, others inherit madness." I almost laughed. That's what she'd told them. That my mind had been slipping for years. That's how she earned her sympathy. But sympathy can't buy silence forever. My next move would be louder than their whispers. Before I went to bed, I called the local editor. He didn't answer, so I left a message. "You've published fiction," I said. "Tomorrow, I'll give you facts. We'll see which sells better." The next morning, I stood at my window as the paperboy cycled past again. He didn't look up this time. The air smelled faintly of rain, and for a moment the world was quiet, almost kind. I reached for the torn newspaper still on the table. The edges had curled, but the words were intact. She'd made sure of that. They printed my shame, but not her theft. Her voice trembled when the manager called me co-owner. The word struck like a small explosion. Quiet, but it rearranged the air. I stood in the kitchen, hand tight around the phone, watching the morning light slice across the table. The glow from the computer monitor nearby felt too bright, too revealing. as if even machines knew I was about to lose something that had once been mine. The woman on the other end cleared her throat. "Mrs. Harris, we're calling regarding an internal review. A transfer of $8,300 was processed last month under your authorization." "My authorization?" I said slowly. "That's impossible." "Yes, ma'am. The form shows your signature. It was verified with your existing records." The air felt heavy, the kind that comes before storms. I stared at the folder still open on the counter, the one with the estate papers, the ones I'd already used to prove forgery once before. My pulse thudded in my ears. "Could you send me a copy?" "Certainly. But you might want to come in. There are complications." I heard hesitation in her tone, the kind that meant she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to mention over the phone. When I arrived, the bank's lobby greeted me with that false calm, soft lighting, muted carpets, the scent of disinfectant and money. The manager, a woman in her 40s with two kind eyes, led me into her office. She closed the blinds halfway, as though privacy could soften betrayal. She turned her monitor toward me. "This is the document," she said. "See here, the co-ownership authorization dated April 16th. The screen glowed white, my signature staring back at me like a ghost that had learned to forge itself. I leaned closer. "That isn't mine. The curl on the H, it's wrong. Mine always loops higher." She nodded carefully. "I believe you, but according to protocol, the account is joint until an official dispute is filed. We'll need verification documents and copies of your ID." I opened my folder. "You'll find everything you need: reference entry F91 and affidavit form 27A. She took the papers, studying the notary stamp, then looked up. "You've been through this before, haven't you?" "Yes," I said quietly. "She's done this before." There was a pause. The hum of the ceiling light deepened, a soft electric buzz filling the silence. "She's your daughter?" I nodded. The woman sighed, eyes softening. "I'll have to report this to the fraud division. Once we confirm the irregularity, we'll freeze all transfers under both names." "Do it," I said. "Freeze everything. Let her explain the warmth in her bank while mine went cold." As she typed, her fingers moved fast, deliberate. I watched the cursor blink, each flash like a heartbeat counting down to confrontation. "This may escalate into a legal matter," she said. "If she contests it, subpoenas will follow." "I'm ready for that. You'll need to file an intent to revoke by morning. I can print it now." The printer hissed beside her desk. The paper came out still warm. I signed it slowly, every letter deliberate, proof that this time my signature was my own. When she stamped the form, the seal clicked against the paper, a sound that echoed faintly through the office. The light above flickered once, briefly dimming, as though the building itself understood the gravity of the moment. As I stood to leave, she said gently, "You should prepare yourself. People who manipulate records rarely stop with accounts. They go for credibility next." I met her eyes. "She already has. She's been buying silence with sympathy." The manager hesitated. "If you don't mind my saying, it's brave what you're doing. Most people would walk away." "I did once," I said. "Now I'm walking back." Outside, the sun hit the glass doors, scattering light across the marble floor. It should have felt cleansing, but it only made me squint, as though truth itself were too harsh to look at directly. My phone buzzed before I reached the car, an unknown number again. I let it ring. The message arrived seconds later. "Stop this before you regret it." I didn't reply. I forwarded it straight to the bank's fraud department. That night, the glow from my computer filled the living room as I watched the investigation portal load. "Case opened," it said in plain, bureaucratic font. They promised subpoenas by morning. I changed every lock, but guilt still got in. The locksmith's drill whirred through the afternoon, its grinding echo filling the hallway where laughter once lived. Each click of metal against metal sounded final, deliberate, like a sentence being carried out. By the time the last lock turned, the house no longer felt like mine. It felt like something under protection, not possession. When he handed me the new set of keys, they clinked softly against each other. small silver reminders that trust had been replaced with control. I held them tight, the edges digging into my palm. The texture of cold steel pressed meaning into my skin. Access withdrawn. Boundaries redrawn. At 5 that evening, I drove to the small law office near the courthouse. The eviction order sat waiting on the polished oak desk, stamped and sealed. The attorney looked at me as though searching for hesitation. "Are you sure about serving it yourself?" "Yes," I said. "It's my house. I should be the one to end it." He nodded. "Then you'll need a witness. I've called Officer Lang. She'll meet you there." By the time I arrived home, dusk had started to crawl across the porch. The house glowed faintly behind the curtains, a light she must have turned on to make it look lived in. My breath fogged in the cooling air as Officer Lang joined me at the gate, clipboard in hand. "You can hand it over," she said gently, "and I'll document the delivery." I hesitated for a moment, not out of fear, but out of memory. Every step up that walkway carried ghosts, birthdays, laughter, the day she first learned to ride a bike on that cracked driveway. Yet every ghost felt heavy with betrayal now. I knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. She must have been waiting. Her face was pale, framed by the glow of the lamp inside. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice sharp. "I'm here for what's mine," I said. She laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in months, brittle and cruel. "You think this will make you righteous?" I handed her the folded paper. "This makes it legal." She unfolded it with shaking fingers. "An eviction notice? You're actually throwing me out?" "You threw me out first," I said quietly, "from my own life." The paper trembled in her hand, the edges brushing against the air like small wings of defiance. "You're heartless." "No," I said, stepping back. "Just done being manipulated." The officer signed her form, confirming receipt. My daughter glared at her. "You're really standing there while she ruins her own family?" Lang's expression stayed even. "I'm here to witness, not to judge." Something in her tone made the silence heavier. My daughter looked back at me, fury burning through her tears. "You'll regret this." I turned away, voice steady. "I've regretted enough." Behind me, the sound of her footsteps echoed down the hall, fast, uneven, then slamming into a door. I heard drawers opening, objects thrown, the kind of storm people create when they realize power has changed hands. Officer Lang spoke softly. "We'll document the delivery and seal. You've done what most can't." "It doesn't feel like winning," I said. "Just necessary." "That's what real boundaries sound like," she replied. We walked back toward the car. The porch light flickered once, a brief flash that faded before stabilizing. I slid the final key into my pocket, the sharp edge catching against my thumb again. A small cut, barely bleeding, but enough to feel alive. Halfway down the street, my phone buzzed. A notification blinked across the screen. Voice recording received. Reference ID L22. I didn't remember turning on my phone's recorder. I pressed play. Her voice filled the car, trembling but loud. "She thinks she can take everything. I swear, if she does this, I'll make sure she loses more than a house." The recording ended with the slam of a door. Her threat wasn't whispered. It was recorded. Sometimes justice begins with a red light. The moment I pressed record, a small glow flickered on the table. Steady, patient, watching. I sat perfectly, still, hands folded, heartbeat too loud in the quiet room. Outside, a clock somewhere ticked, keeping time with my pulse. She would arrive soon. She always did when she sensed control slipping away. When the knock came, it wasn't tentative. 3 sharp raps, her rhythm, her warning. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. The air that followed her in carried perfume and accusation. "You've humiliated me enough," she said, tossing her bag onto the couch. "You think those papers make you righteous? They make you cruel." I stayed calm, my voice even. "You came to collect, not confess. Which is it today?" Her eyes narrowed. "Don't play clever. I know what you told the bank, what you filed with the court. You've destroyed my reputation." I tilted my head slightly. Reputation isn't stolen. It's earned. Or lost. She paced the floor, shoes tapping against the wood like a metronome of rage. "You owe me for what you've done," she snapped. "You'll transfer the rest, $12,000, and this will end." The number hung in the air, sharp and absurd. "You forged my name for $8,300 last time," I said softly. "Now you want interest on betrayal?" Her face flushed. "I had no choice. You left me nothing." The recorder blinked quietly on the table. Her voice trembled, then rose again. "You think that piece of paper gives you power? I'll make you regret turning people against me. You're not the victim here." For a moment, I almost believed her. Guilt is persuasive when it wears a familiar face, but then I remembered every sleepless night, every whisper in town, every time she twisted sympathy into leverage. "Say that again," I said. "What?" "That I'm not the victim." "I said you're not—" "Good," I interrupted. "Now keep talking." Her eyes flicked toward the table, to the faint red glow she hadn't noticed before. "Are you recording me?" "Yes." "You can't do that." I already did. Silence stretched between us, heavy and dangerous. Then she laughed, a sound too brittle to be human. "You think anyone will believe this? You've already been painted as unstable." "Then I suppose your confession will make excellent contrast." The seconds that followed felt longer than years. She turned away, muttering to herself, pacing near the window where the late afternoon light slipped through the blinds in narrow lines, like prison bars across her reflection. "You wanted money," I said. "You wanted control. You wanted to rewrite the past, but what you didn't want was truth." Her shoulders stiffened. "You don't understand what it's like to need." "I do," I whispered. "I just don't steal to fill the emptiness." Her next words came low, shaking. "I forged it. Fine. But I did it because you shut me out, because you made me feel invisible." Exhaled, the sound shaky but real. "There it is." The recorder's light blinked once, then went still. Later that evening, I met the officer at the precinct. He wore a calm expression, professional but human. He listened to the playback, nodding slowly as her voice filled the small interview room. When it ended, he closed the file folder and looked at me. "This," he said, "is enough to proceed." For the first time in months, I felt my body loosen. Proof had finally done what pleading never could. It spoke without emotion, without history, without bias. Just truth, clear and undeniable. He handed me a reference slip marked with a digital ID. I folded it into my jacket pocket. The paper was warm from his hand, real in a way justice rarely is. As I stepped outside, the streetlights hummed to life, scattering small halos across the wet pavement. My reflection shimmered faintly in a puddle, older but unbroken. The house waited in silence when I returned. I placed the recorder on the table again, its tiny red light steady against the dark. For once, I didn't flinch at its glow. It wasn't surveillance. It was salvation. The red light stopped blinking only when she confessed. The courthouse windows reflected every face I'd lost. Morning light spilled across the marble floors, fractured by glass so clear it seemed cruel. Every reflection looked like a version of myself, one that had stayed silent too long, one that had forgiven too quickly, and one that finally understood that truth, no matter how late, still had weight. Inside, the air was heavy with whispers. Rows of strangers leaned forward, waiting not for justice, but for spectacle. Somewhere behind them, the low hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence between heartbeats. My palms were cold despite the heat trapped beneath my sleeves. Across the aisle she sat in her pressed gray dress, head slightly bowed, rehearsed remorse shadowing her face. But I knew that stillness. It was calculation. The clerk adjusted the microphone and called the case. The judge entered, his robe sweeping past the rail like a tide erasing footprints. "This hearing will review the submission under reference C2187, he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, The plaintiff has provided documented financial evidence, verified transfer records, and a digital recording of an admission. A murmur rippled through the benches. Someone whispered, "That's her mother?" The words reached me like a bruise reopening. The officer placed the recorder on the evidence table. The red light blinked once, then went still as the audio began. Her voice filled the hall, sharp, trembling, undeniable. "I forged it. Fine. But I did it because she made me feel invisible." Gasps scattered like glass breaking in sequence. Each syllable landed clean, unedited. No excuses, no mercy. She turned toward me then, eyes glistening, not with regret, but with fear. "You planned this," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I preserved it," I said. The judge raised his hand for silence. "Order in the court." I looked toward the tall window behind the bench. The sunlight poured through it, striking the polished floor in geometric shards. The glare caught the silver gavel emblem mounted beside the seal, its edge shining like a warning. For a moment, I saw both of us reflected there, her defiant, me steady. The prosecutor handed the transcript to the clerk. "As requested, Your Honor, this is the official record of the recorded statement, time-stamped and authenticated by the county office." The judge read a section aloud, each word measured and slow. "This statement confirms the misappropriation of $8,300 with intent and further demands restitution of $12,000 under civil code." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "The court acknowledges the evidence as admissible. We will recess for verification of the probate injunction and the financial order under Notice C-22187. The room shifted, a collective intake of breath, shoes scraping the floor, paper rustling like dry leaves. Through it all, I stayed still. After months of being the accused in private, I was finally the witness in public. As the judge rose, his gavel struck the block once, firm, resonant. "Recess until 3 o'clock. The sound reverberated through the hall, sharp as lightning finding glass. I turned slightly, meeting her eyes. She mouthed something I couldn't fully hear over the growing noise. Perhaps apology, perhaps venom. It didn't matter. The bailiff approached. "Ma'am, we'll need your statement for the transcript update." I nodded, my voice low. "Include this line," I said. "Truth delayed isn't truth denied." He hesitated, then wrote it down. As the benches emptied, I caught sight of the window again. Outside, people gathered on the courthouse steps. Reporters, strangers, maybe neighbors who had read her name in the bulletin months ago. Their faces blurred behind the glass, but their curiosity was clear. I walked closer to the pane. My reflection merged with theirs, an invisible boundary separating judgment from endurance. The light flickered across my face, bright and unforgiving, yet somehow clean. For years I had begged institutions to listen. Now one had finally spoken back. The judge returned moments later to retrieve his notes. He glanced at me, a small nod, the kind that said more than sympathy. It said acknowledgement. When the bailiff closed the doors behind us, the sound echoed deep, like the end of something long overdue. Then came the second strike of the gavel, harder, final. The gavel struck like thunder through glass. By evening, our faces were news. The local anchor's voice carried through every living room, crisp and neutral, as though reading the weather. Behind her, the footage looped. Me on the courthouse steps, holding the folder. Her a few paces behind, head lowered, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. The chyron read, "Inheritance fraud hearing, family divided." The light from the television flickered across the living room walls, cool and artificial. Outside, dusk was folding itself over the street, washing everything in gray. I watched the broadcast alone, hearing the echo of my own voice from earlier that day, calm, steady, practiced. They played the recording once more, my voice saying, "Truth delayed isn't truth denied." Then the anchor added, "Authorities confirm the ongoing civil case under reference C-22187. Preliminary findings favor the plaintiff." A pause. Then she smiled, professional, distant. In other news. But the screen lingered for half a second too long before cutting away, leaving my reflection hovering faintly over the frozen image of her face. Later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages poured in, some from people I hadn't heard from in years. "We saw the news." "You were so strong." She had it coming. I didn't respond. Strength wasn't what I felt, just relief, the kind that sits heavy instead of light. When I stepped outside, the night air was sharp and bright with static from nearby televisions. Through open windows, I could hear my own story retold in different voices. "She's the one from the news." Poor woman, what she must have endured. I'd never forgive my own child for that. The words floated like ash, sympathetic, curious, poisonous all at once. I kept walking, each step syncing with the hum of a neighbor's TV somewhere in the dark. At the end of the street, a van with the station's logo idled near the lamppost. A young reporter stood outside, fixing her microphone. When she saw me, her eyes widened. "Ms." She stopped herself, fumbling for words. "Would you mind sharing how it feels now that the truth's out?" I looked at her camera. The lens stared back, glassy and indifferent. "It feels quieter," I said. "Do you regret any of it?" I thought for a long time before answering. "Regret isn't the same as guilt," I said softly. "One means you wish it hadn't happened. The other means you caused it. I only carry one of those." She nodded, unsure whether that was enough. "Can we use that quote?" "You already have," I said, turning away. The bright camera light dimmed behind me, and for the first time in months, I realized the glow didn't follow. Back home, I muted the television but let it play. Just light, no sound. My reflection hovered in the screen again, half ghost, half survivor. I traced the edge of the glass with my fingertip, the surface still warm from hours of static. A news alert banner scrolled across the bottom. "Community reactions pour in after today's ruling." I switched it off. Silence filled the room like something sacred. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to fade into respect. I sat there, letting it hold me. No more statements, no more records, no more proof to defend. Just the echo of everything that had been said, finally ending where it began. In truth. A faint glow from the streetlight slipped through the curtain, striking the edge of the table where the sealed transcript lay. Its seal shimmered briefly, then went still. Tomorrow, they'd talk about someone else. The cameras would move on. But tonight, my name belonged to quiet again, untouched, unchallenged, finally free of the noise. For once, silence followed my name. Her handwriting finally trembled. The envelope sat alone on the kitchen table, pale against the dark wood, my name written in the same looping script that had once signed away everything I owned. For a long time, I didn't touch it. The return address was hers, familiar but smaller somehow, as if even the ink carried hesitation. When I finally slid it open, a faint trace of perfume rose, soft, floral, ghost-like. It was the same scent she'd worn the day of the hearing. It lingered just long enough to hurt, then disappeared. Inside, one page. No apology at first, only the shape of one trying to form. She wrote, "I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope the noise ends here." My hands didn't shake, though I half expected them to. I read it twice, then once more aloud, the sound of her words fragile against the still air. I thought of the courtroom, of the red light on the recorder, of the way truth had traveled farther than either of us imagined. I'd built my strength in fragments, evidence, statements, signatures, and now she was offering silence as her version of peace. I placed the letter on the counter beside the old silver locket she'd once given me. It had been hers before the lies, before the inheritance papers, before trust was itemized like property. The hinge was worn, but intact, the tiny photograph inside faded at the edges. For years, that locket had been proof of something softer. Now it was just another artifact, another entry in a life cataloged by what was taken and what was left behind. I sat there, tracing the curve of the paper with my thumb. The letter smelled faintly of roses, her favorite scent, but beneath it, I could almost sense the metallic tang of ink drying, of confession written too late. There was no, "I'm sorry," only the line, "You'll always be my mother, but I can't be your daughter anymore." It was strange. The words didn't sting as much as they settled, heavy and final, like dust finding its corner after a long storm. I folded the page once, then again, neat and deliberate. I didn't tear it, I didn't frame it. I just opened the safe in the study, the same one that had once held forged deeds, bank slips, false signatures, and placed the letter inside. Next to it lay the official records, the amended property form, the notarized judgment, the reference entry C2187 stamped and sealed. The truth had its own archives now. As the safe door clicked shut, I whispered something I hadn't planned. "This isn't forgiveness," I said quietly. "It's containment." Outside, the evening wind carried the sound of a distant church bell. 12 chimes. A measure of time, not grief. I walked back to the table, turned off the lamp, and let the faint perfume drift one last time through the dim room before it dissolved completely. I didn't hate her anymore. Hatred required energy, and I was finally tired in a way that felt clean. The next morning, the mailbox stood empty. No letters, no echoes, just quiet, earned, not given. For the first time, I realized I didn't need her words to explain the past. The silence did that for her. Her silence was finally honest. I found peace where she once planted guilt. The garden had been silent for months, weeds claiming territory, the once tended rose bushes bare and brittle. I knelt in the earth, gloves on, soil cool against my fingers, and began. Each spadeful turned over was a reclaiming, a small restoration of what she had abandoned, both in nature and in heart. The sunlight touched the petals of the first bud I pruned, casting a glow that felt like permission, to breathe, to rebuild, to exist beyond her shadow. The air smelled of damp earth and new growth, a scent stronger than the perfumes of old deceit. I worked methodically, planting, pruning, restoring. Each movement was deliberate, measured, a rhythm against the memory of her absence. The tools felt firm and familiar in my hands, trowel, spade, gloves, and the photograph of her as a child tucked under a stone, a witness, silent and observing. Neighbors occasionally walked by. Some nodded in polite acknowledgement, others kept their distance. It no longer mattered. The garden became a private tribunal, a place where justice was measured in blooms and soil, not whispers. As I replaced a fallen rosebush, I remembered the arguments, the threats, the legal papers stacked in cold offices. They had carried their own weight, but here, between these rows, consequences translated into growth rather than pain. I paused to wipe sweat from my brow, feeling the texture of the soil cling to my fingers, rough, real, grounding. It reminded me of the day the eviction notice cut my thumb. The proof of authority felt in tactile terms, and now, here, tactile peace. I planted a new photograph beneath the oldest rose, a reminder that even the past could be honored without letting it dominate. My hands traced the curve of the frame, fingers brushing petals and glass alike, feeling the contrast between brittle history and living color. The wind carried the scent of lavender from a neighbor's garden, faint but insistent, merging with the rose's perfume. It reminded me that life continued beyond one betrayal, that community could still offer quiet accompaniment, even without acknowledgement. Every new bud became a testament, a quiet verdict that justice was not loud nor vengeful. It was patient, deliberate, and deeply rooted. The debts repaid, the property reclaimed, the safe papers secured, the ledger balanced not with confrontation, but with nurture. I stepped back, surveying the garden now half restored, the rows straight, the soil dark and fertile. The light shifted, late afternoon sun scattering over leaves, illuminating small victories, a bud swelling, a petal caught in motion, a line of soil smoothed to perfection. Justice had settled softly here, without applause or record, but with undeniable presence. It was personal, private, and wholly mine. No courtroom could match the evidence held in the curve of a rose, the scent in the air, the rough texture of earth against skin. I knelt once more, pressing my palms against the soil, whispering aloud, "This is ours. This is mine." The promise lingered like dew, unspoken yet certain. Hours passed, the light softened, and I gathered the tools. The photograph remained beneath the rose, a witness and a relic, the garden a testament to endurance. Forgiveness bloomed slower than roses, each day a careful unfolding. Yet as I rose and surveyed the space I had restored, I felt it pulse with life, with quiet resolution, a peace that neither her letters nor her lies could touch. I left the garden, the soil cool under my gloves, the scent of roses drifting in the evening breeze. And for the first time, the weight of the past felt lifted, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of what I had cultivated, what I had earned, and what remained wholly, finally, mine. This time, I kept the safe unlatched. Sunlight slanted through the attic window, catching dust in slow, lazy columns that swirled like fleeting memories. The air smelled faintly of old paper and varnish, familiar yet softened by time. I stepped closer, hands brushing against the cool metal edge of the safe, feeling the slight tremor in the hinge as I left it open. The photograph inside caught the light. Our family, frozen in smiles that once masked so much tension. I studied the frame carefully. Faces once burdened with expectation now seemed lighter, framed not by deceit, but by perspective. The image no longer demanded guarding. It was no longer a testament to control, but a reflection of endurance. Every inch of the safe's interior, from the lock mechanism to the lined interior, had held secrets and lies for years. Now it held only memory. The attic felt larger, emptier, yet comforting. Shadows retreated to corners where dust motes caught them, glinting in the afternoon glow. I realized that the weight of vigilance, of guarding what was vulnerable, had lifted. It was remarkable how absence of tension could feel so potent, a reminder that the smallest gestures of trust, even with an object, could echo deeply. I traced the edges of the photograph with my finger, feeling the texture of the frame, smooth and worn from decades of handling. In the past, I had feared leaving it exposed. Now, leaving it visible was an assertion, a choice that truth was no longer imprisoned. Memories could breathe without the suffocating clutch of secrecy. Outside, the faint creak of the attic floorboards under my weight mixed with the muffled sound of the neighborhood stirring. For a moment, I imagined her seeing it, the safe open, the photograph luminous in the light. I didn't care. My vow had shifted from vigilance to release, from fear to acknowledgement. I let my gaze linger on the photograph, noticing details I had overlooked. The way light hit the smiles, the angle of a hand resting gently on a shoulder, the small imperfections that made it real. These imperfections no longer demanded correction. They were testimony, quiet and enduring. I inhaled the subtle scent of the attic, the blend of wood polish, old paper, and dust, and felt a quiet thrill. It was a sensory punctuation, a confirmation that reflection, like light, could illuminate even the corners we had kept dark for too long. The safe, open and silent, became a symbol of that illumination. The photograph was the only artifact left in the safe. The rest, the letters, the ledgers, the objects of control, had been sorted, catalogued, returned, or destroyed. I had no need to revisit them. They no longer held power. Instead, this single frame stood alone, a concentrated proof that time and patience could reclaim narrative, even after betrayal and turmoil. I sat on the attic floor, leaning against the wall, letting the light warm my shoulders. It was a quiet, unspoken reckoning. Justice had its moment, society its record, but here, in this space, peace was its own verdict. No court, no ledger, no record could confer what this small act, a safe left open, a photograph visible, did naturally. I ran my fingers over the photo once more and whispered, "It's enough. It's all enough." The echoes of past arguments, threats, and secrets seemed distant, softened by the brightness falling over the safe. In that moment I realized freedom was not dramatic. It was patient, subtle, a light poured over dust and memory, revealing form without judgment. The attic finally breathed without secrets. Dust motes settled, light shifted, and the safe remained open. There was no need to lock away what had been reclaimed, no need to guard memory from itself. Truth, once confined, now moved freely, and in its movement, so did I. The same dawn that began our ruin now ends it. Morning spilled across the yard in warm, honeyed light, catching dew on the grass and tracing gold along the roofline. I stepped outside, bare feet brushing against cool earth, inhaling the scent of lavender that had survived neglect and storms. Church bells rang in the distance, their chime, gentle punctuation, reminding me that time continued even after betrayal, even after all the confrontations and reckonings. I paused, looking at the key I held loosely in my hand. The metal had lost its cold bite, warmed by the sun and by purpose reclaimed. It had once symbolized control, secrecy, and fear, and now it was a token of choice, of release. I turned it over, listening to the faint click as I fit it into the gate, imagining that every lock I had once endured, every barrier she had erected, had dissolved into possibility. The air carried a lightness I hadn't noticed for decades. Birds called from the trees, flitting from branch to branch, a soft counterpoint to the memories that had haunted me. I remembered the mornings before deceit clouded our home, the quiet breakfasts and the laughter that had slipped away like smoke. Now, that smoke lifted, replaced by clarity, and the rising sun seemed to write a new chapter directly onto the garden, onto the roof, onto every surface that had absorbed our grief. I walked past the flower beds I had tended with trembling hands, each bloom a tiny act of reclamation. The soil beneath my feet was cool, textured with pebbles and life, a grounding sensation that reminded me of resilience. Even the shadows shifted differently now, stretching long and gentle instead of sharp and accusing. The motif of light, sunlight falling across dust, across photographs, across garden soil, had become my companion, echoing every vow I had whispered in silence over the years. Memories surfaced, unbidden. I saw her face in flashes, the manipulations, the whispers, the closed doors and locked safes. Yet they felt smaller, diminished under the morning's clarity. I remembered the letters returned, the eviction notices, the courtroom's gavel striking with authority. Each confrontation, each proof, each artifact, the recorder, the locket, the photo, had contributed to this moment. They had been instruments of validation and of pain, and now they were proof that endings could also be beginnings. I inhaled deeply, the scent of wet earth and early blooms mingling with the faint trace of lavender from my garden. It grounded me, connected me to the cycles of renewal, to the knowledge that the past, however dark, could be acknowledged without owning its weight forever. The sun climbed higher, brushing my shoulders, touching the key, illuminating the house where secrets had once suffocated every corner. I glanced up at the attic window. The safe remained open, dust motes dancing in the lingering light. It was a quiet monument to reflection and release, a final testament that vigilance and justice need not carry bitterness. I understood finally that the act of leaving it unlatched was symbolic, yes, but also practical. Truth, once faced, thrives without imprisonment. As the morning deepened, I stepped back, surveying the garden, the house, the key in my palm. Every rosebush, every flower, every worn path in the yard had become part of a narrative I could finally own without fear. I whispered a vow, soft and firm. Let it remain open. Let it be free. The words felt heavier than any legal document, more binding than any courtroom testimony. The sunlight struck the key again, glinting, reflecting across the porch and windows, catching the dust in the attic in fleeting, shimmering patterns. It was not just illumination, it was confirmation. The cycles of grief and betrayal had yielded, through patience, through confrontation, and through quiet acts of reclamation, a horizon that promised continuity without oppression. The phrase I once muttered in grief returned, reshaped. I thought secrets died with my husband. Some secrets save what love forgot. It resonated across the yard, across the house, across the moments stitched together by pain, reconciliation, and patience. Each echo of that thought became a bridge, connecting sorrow to wisdom, closure to reflection. And the attic stayed open to the sky. Dust drifted in golden columns, the safe inside bathed in sunlight, the photograph visible, unguarded, no longer a prisoner of past fears. The air held a gentle warmth, a sense of completion that was neither loud nor triumphant, but enduring. The light, rising and constant, witnessed the transformation, and I finally felt the space between loss and peace narrow into a single, unbroken line.